when you start to peel away, the layers of the onion, and you start to sort of unpick what does that word mean, and what does that word mean to different customers, what constitutes a great relationship to a customer, it becomes really interesting. And once you start to go into that world, you can then start to figure out, well, how can I align to the types of characteristics, values, mindsets, whatever we would like to talk about, in order to try and be more successful with my client. And that's quite a sophisticated process of doing that.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. That was Philip Squire. Phil is the CEO of Consalia, which is a global sales performance improvement company. And I have to admit, I always enjoy it when Phil comes on the show. We get an opportunity to talk about selling. And in our conversation, we're talking about this topic. How do salespeople know if they're selling to their customers in a way the buyer wants? So we start by examining the question, what do buyers want from sellers? And as you'll learn, it's not more selling skills, as Phil shares. Buyers want values from sellers, values and mindset. So we dive into the positive values that buyers want from sellers, including authenticity, client centricity, proactive creativity, and tactful audacity. And we explore the 4 negative values that buyers unfortunately experience in their interaction with sellers way too often. That's manipulation, being seller-centric, being complacent, and being overtly arrogant. So again, details of all of these and much, much more. But before we get to Phil, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. So thank you for your help with that. And let's jump into it with Phil Squire. Phil, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, I can't quite believe that you've invited me back a second time. What happened? Did you forget the first time?
Well, wait a minute. Is this the second time or the third time?
Well, I know that we've invited you to one of our podcasts. So this is the third time we've been together on a podcast. Right. But the second time you've actually sort of held the mic, so to speak.
Yeah.
Controlling
Yeah. So for people who didn't hear the first time you were on the show, tell people about you and what you do.
Well, I'm the CEO of Consalia. We're a sales business school located in London and Singapore. And we train and develop many hundreds of salespeople. I guess our mission is very much to try and elevate the profession of sales. And so sales education for us is the way that we do that. And we do that through partnering with universities. And so that's what we do.
All right. So you said Consalia, but see, I just presumed it was Consalia because you're in sales training. Anyway.
Oh, it's funny. The name so Consalia is a joint venture between 3 businesses: a UK business, a Spanish business, and a Italian business. Oh. And we decided to form the joint venture, and then we had to come up with a name for the joint venture.
Okay.
And we spent quite a bit of time. We wanted to choose a name that hadn't been invented before.
Right.
And so it took us quite a long time because most names, you Google it and someone's thought of it.
Right.
And then one of our one of the 2 Southern Europeans came up with the Consalia, from consultancy. And Alia.
All right.
So that's the history of Consalia. And so we've been able to register that as a name, in various web domains around the world. And no one's got it because it's just purely invented.
Yeah. Well, at least it doesn't have like an X in it or something, like most tech companies.
But it could be Consalia, as in sales. But
that's what I thought. That's where I thought it came from.
That's
anyway.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. We'll stop boring the listeners with this story.
Yes.
So,
okay.
Well, today we're going to talk about a topic I love, which is how do salespeople know if they're selling to their customers in a way that the buyer wants? And I think you and I share a lot of agreement on this perspective that the buyer should drive how you sell.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's something that sort of was quite interesting during the early stages of my my sort of doctorate project was investigating from the buyer's perspective how they wanted to be sold to, and
Right.
and it's interesting when you start to go into the research, you sort of realize you start looking at what other research is being conducted on the topic of sales, and you get into all sorts of academic journals and see what the academics are doing to research the topic. And most times the theories of sales practice are based on perceptions of what salespeople think they need to do in order to sell.
Well, I would say the 99% of the sales training industry is based upon that perspective.
I would agree. Yeah.
Right. Is some person's idea about how they think they sell.
That's right. And they could be incredibly successful people, but,
Sure.
From my point of view, and I know we share the same views on this. It's not the right place to start. Surely you should start from the customer and work backwards. And
Well, you'd think, right?
you would think that.
I mean, for several reasons. One is, from your research and other people's research. Challenger talks about this as, I think Challenger was 53% of the buying purchase decision is based on the buyer's experience with the individual seller. And I actually think that's low these days, especially in competitive markets where the customer's perception of the products and their features and functions and pricing are all virtually the same. I think that buying experience actually is more decisive than 53%.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that. And I think that, particularly with the pandemic, I think the whole topic of the relational aspects of how salespeople sell, how buyers buy is becoming even more important as well. So, yeah, I think it's perhaps it's an overused term, this sort of relationships, in the sense that one can skip over the term fairly quickly. But what does it really mean? What does that mean?
Well, gosh, we could spend
a long time,
days on that alone. I mean, it's there's such a stubborn block of people in the sales world that when they hear relationships, the only thing that comes to mind is friendship. Right?
Yes.
It's like,
my
goodness. I mean, and this we'll get to this issue because this speaks to, I think, what really is one of the central issues in helping sellers improve is this inability to, I don't know, someone used the term recently, more cognitive sophistication, right? In terms of how you perceive the world is really the difference maker, I think, for people that succeed in multiple forms in life, and I think in sales in particular, right? And this inability to look beyond a definition of relationship purely as a friendship is.
Yes, I think that's partly it, and I think a lot of people when they talk about relationship selling, tend to think that is the friendship angle is what we mean by relationships. But from the work that I've done, and I think also believe from the work that you've done and your observations, you can have great relationships, but actually it doesn't help you sell. Customers are looking for different types of relationships, and when I talk about relationships, you sort of break it down into the four mindsets,
right,
and
which we're going to get to.
Yeah, which we'll get to. But it's interesting. There is when you start to peel away, the layers of the onion, and you start to sort of unpick what does that word mean, and what does that word mean to different customers. What constitutes a great relationship to a customer. It becomes really interesting. And once you start to go into that world, you can then start to figure out, well, how can I align to the types of characteristics,
right,
values, mindsets, whatever we would like to talk about, in order to try and be more successful with my client. And that's quite a sophisticated process of doing that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I sort of, in my book, Sell Without Selling Out, stayed away from the term relationship.
You did.
Somewhat deliberately.
Yeah.
And talk about connection, right?
Yeah.
It's because, unfortunately, again, I think too many in sales get hung up on this idea of a relationship being a friendship, but you need to, when you look at the definition of what a relationship means, it says it's the way two or more things or people are connected. So I thought, well, let's just cut that out of the argument, right?
That's great.
Fundamentally, that's what we're doing. We're finding a way to connect.
Yeah. I think, it's really great. And I think it just shows the importance of words, doesn't it? You know, actually sort of getting to the essence of a particular word. And it takes a long time. It really does matter.
Well, I mean, without getting off track, I mean, one of the ones that I have a hard time with and talk about is, objections. It's like buyers aren't objecting to anything. I mean, it's not like in a courtroom, it's like, oh, I find that, objection, Your Honor, or, I find that objectionable. It's like, oh, no, they don't find your pricing objectionable. They don't care that much, right? It's like, but we use these words that people look at and think, oh my God, they object. I have to be defensive. I have to go on the defensive now, right? Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. I think it's really interesting. And, it takes, I think it takes a long time to be able to sometimes come up with the word that expresses exactly, what is meant or what you mean. And it's
time for us to rethink some of these words
and rethink.
Selling. I mean,
exactly.
I mean, that's why I go for connection versus relationship, just because I think it helps people conceptualize it better, what they need to do.
Yeah, I mean, and you've got connect. Sorry, yes, go on.
No, go ahead. You.
I was going to say, so around connection, you've also got connected as well, and you can start to look at how such words can be used to kind of express not only relationships but also how you bring solutions to bear, how you connect, various products and solutions to what customers are looking for. So, okay. So what other words? You're about to go on.
Oh, well, this is, a complete digression, but
it's okay.
It's like the word hunter.
Yes.
Okay. Right. Now, I come from part of the United States in the upper Midwest, Wisconsin, where deer hunting is sort of the state sport. Yeah. And, during deer season, you see people driving on cars with deer carcasses on the back and so on. But so we use this term hunter.
Yes.
But when you read about how people, by and large, for the most part, hunt deer, is they find a place in the woods and they build a deer stand.
Yeah.
So they're in one place and they go out and put like doe urine or some other attractant lure on trees and bushes nearby, and they wait for the deer to come by.
Yeah.
Now, as I like to say, what does that sound like? That sounds like inbound, doesn't it? I mean, that's I mean, and that's the most popular form of hunting in the United States is deer hunting, and people, is wait for the prospects to come in and then deal with it. Similar with
I wonder. I mean, one of my favorite sports is fly fishing. Mm-hmm. So let's just examine that, because with fly fishing, you don't stand still on the bank. Yeah, you have to find your fish.
Right.
It's really quite interesting. I mean, when people draw analogies between sport and sales, and of course there's so many analogies, I actually think fly fishing's not a bad one to consider. You don't have the team aspect necessarily with fly fishing, but the process is really interesting because you have to find your fish. You have to find your sales opportunity. And sometimes you see through the clear water, you see the fish below, and you then need to work out what is that fish, what type of fly is that fish going to take? Yeah. So you then have to, from your fly box, select the right fly. You then have to
what you're saying,
land.
though, is you're looking at it from the fish's perspective.
Exactly. Yeah, here you go. And sometimes you have to read, will the fish take the fly from the left or the right? Yeah. And then you need to try and get your fly to land on the water either to the left, because sometimes a fish can be blind in one eye and they will only take from the left. Sometimes, I'm not saying it's often, but if the fish is not feeding, it is no matter what fly you put on the water, the fish is not going to take. Yeah. So, it's the same with sales. If the buyer is not at that moment ready to buy, no matter what you're going to do is going to make them buy. So it's interesting.
I agree. Another set of words.
Another set of words, but it's very interesting. Yeah. The thing that you don't have with a fly fishing analogy for sales is, the concept of team. Yeah. Because it's very much an individualistic pursuit. You're not working with others. And I think a lot of selling today is actually involved in collaborating, not just with the customer, but actually how you collaborate internally. So that's the bit. That's why I don't use the fishing analogy. But because you brought up deer, I thought I'd bring up my 4-pound trout.
Well, getting back on track, though, is because again, we're saying the importance of looking at buying, selling from the buyer's perspective.
Yeah.
I'm interested in your take on this. I look at selling in sort of the lens of jobs to be done, right? Is that the buyer is hiring the seller, quote unquote, hiring, to help them make a decision.
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise, why would they talk to a seller? Right? So you talk to the seller to help you get something done.
Yeah.
So when you look at it from that perspective, so you're basically hiring the seller to help them make a decision. Well, when you hire someone, what do you need them to be? What are the attributes they need to have in order to be able to help you?
Yes, there's a wonderful quote from one of the people we interviewed, which is, I want a salesperson, but I don't want them pointed at me. Mm-hmm. I want him pointing back inside his own organization. Mm-hmm. I want him to leverage my power and my weight back in his organization so I can get a better solution, so I can get a better deal across all points of engagement. And I think that was very interesting. So he had this perception of the, to your point of hiring, it absolutely fits that that wonderful quote from the interview. And then you get into all sorts of other sort of conversations about power and weight and authority and also leadership,
right?
As well. So yeah, when we start to talk about relationships, we begin to see there's a whole sort of complex structure of things that potentially a buyer is looking for. I need you to be me inside your company in order to get us the kind of deal that would make us want to buy your solution. And I'm going to evaluate you and everything that you do, to what extent do you meet that criteria?
Well, I'm interested in your research, whether you found, because I've been working with some data provided by an Australian-based company called Trinity Perspectives that's done large number of win-loss analyses, interviews with enterprise buyers. And, they've summarized their data into sort of the 9 reasons why you win deals, 9 reasons why you lose deals.
Okay.
And based on these thousands of interviews, and nowhere in there does it talk about the product, the functions, the features, the price. It's in the main, it's the buyer's experience with the human seller.
Yeah. Well, that doesn't surprise me, yet probably the reasons why most salespeople give for why they lose business is to do with maybe price or
product. Right. I didn't have
product.
This price, this product, or this price, and so
yeah,
on.
yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Right. Okay, that's interesting. And it doesn't surprise me. Yeah. It doesn't surprise me either, because I had similar conversations with, I remember one in particular with one of the heads of the large deal pursuit teams out in America with HP. And he was talking about win-loss reviews, and he was saying it, you know, when you study all the win-loss reviews that they've done, they've come to the conclusion that it's only about relationships. It's not quite only, but that's the standout reason why they lose deals. And he was bemoaning the fact that often, the reasons that are given are others, but actually it's not. Right. So I would totally concur. It'd be really interesting to know what the nine negatives and the 9 positives were, but maybe that's for another, conversation, or are we going to go off on another tangent there, do you think?
Unfortunately I can't show the slides on the audio podcast, but
of course.
I'll share them with you.
Sounds interesting, but I'd be very surprised if they're dissimilar to the kind of things that came out of
they're not at all. I mean,
the doctorate. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not. I mean, I think that when that data was shared with me, and I look at the nine reasons why you win. Yeah, 7 of the 9 were directly reasons that I would call selling in, that I wrote about in my book.
Yes,
and which is all about human-centric selling. And of the 9 reasons why you lose, 5 directly were selling out behaviors.
Right.
So it's. I want to, pose a question to you, because you're in the enablement business, basically, as a training company and so on.
Yeah.
Is sort of following what we talked before, is maybe enablement, and from as it's done in most companies, really has it all wrong, and that they sort of look at their customer, quote unquote customer, as being, the sales team or the sales leader, but it's really their buyer. And how often do our enablement people going out and talking to the buyer and saying, like this company did win-loss analyses and actually finding out the reasons about why they bought, really understanding that, what do their buyers need their sellers to be? Yeah.
I think it's quite shocking, the lack of asking those fundamentally important questions of customers about how do they want to be sold to, and how many decisions are taken at a sales enablement level, which are driven through, again, this rather myopic lens of what I think the sales organization should be doing in order to be more successful. I don't know, what it will take to actually shift that mindset, because I think it's a systemic problem, not just in enablement, but actually also it comes from the higher levels of sales directorship levels or VP of sales. They've got this picture of what good looks like, which bears no relation to actually what customers are wanting. And
I think, so I let me put something forward to you on this, because I just read a book this last week for another guest who's going to be on my show, a book called The Elevated Leader, written by a gentleman named Ryan Gottfredson, who wrote an excellent book prior to that called Success Mindsets. And what he does, he breaks issue down to what he calls the problem is and this is about developing leaders, but it applies broadly to the selling as well. Yeah. He said the problem is that most, and I'll put in the sales context, most sales training is about what he calls horizontal development, which is sort of skills-driven training, right? Yeah. And he said, but the problem is that in order for people to adapt to rapidly changing environments that we all live in, it's not about increasing their skill set, where there's, diminishing marginal return on that investment. Yeah. It's about helping people develop what he called the cognitive and emotional sophistication.
Yes.
to be able to handle more complex environments. And I thought, well, that really summarized, and that's where the audience, I sent Phil a chart that I had developed to try to describe this, is that, yeah, we're investing in this horizontal development in sales. We think it's more about skills. Let's keep training people on skills. And it's really not about skills. It's really about these human attributes, values, as you call them, that enable you to operate. And the challenge becomes, how do we train those things?
Yes. Yeah. I think you're absolutely sort of right. And it's been, I think, similar to our observations. The framework that we have is a framework developed by a Dutch professor, which is Professor Korthagen, and he describes an onion, and in the onion you have at the center your soul, and then round the soul you have your identity, then your mission, then values and beliefs, and then you have competence, and then you have behavior, and then you have the environment. And his argument is, if you're looking for transformation, is that you need to have all of these sort of layers of the onion aligned. If you have someone whose mindset and belief systems or character traits, using the terms that you refer to, if they're not aligned with the kind of behaviors that you need in this world in order to succeed, then you're going to struggle. So against that sort of framework, you've then got, in a world which is changing so quickly. And it's interesting, in the old days, it used to be about technology and how that's changing so quickly. But actually you can put layers on top of that now with things like the pandemic, the Ukraine war, which changes context so quickly.
Yes.
You need to be able to develop fundamental skills of thinking, which you've broken it down into cognitive and emotional. I mean, we haven't broken it down in that way, but the term that we use is around critical reflection. It's not being critical, but it's actually the ability to think.
Yes.
And that arguably one of the most important traits that anyone needs to learn now is simply the ability to critically reflect and to think. And it's not easy to do, because you are influenced often by what you know, and your past, which gives you a certain bias, a certain way of looking at the world.
Right.
And you tend to conform to those principles. To be a great critical reflector, you need to be able to let go of things that have potentially sort of driven the way you approach things, and let come, completely new ideas. And that's that process of critical reflection, I would say, is one of the key skills that is taught on. There's a difference between education and training, I would say, is critical thinking.
Yes.
And this is what we think is arguably one of the most important attributes in today's world. And it's quite interesting when we look at the projects that the students do as a consequence of the sort of master's dissertation and so on. And they do amazing stuff on a whole range of topics, from emotional intelligence to predictive analytics or whatever it might be. But the fundamental skill that underpins everything is critical thinking. And it's that they can apply to almost any situation, and then sort of make a fresh call to action based on that ability to stand back.
Right. But to that point, though, and let's take critical thinking, or I like to use the terms either conceptual thinking or divergent thinking.
Yeah.
That's more almost. Is it a skill or is it a mindset, right? I mean, I think it definitely can be. I mean, it definitely can be. What comes first? That's a really difficult one. I think sometimes you need to have a pivotal event
that challenges your perception of what is going to work or not. Like you may have lost a deal, or you might have, I don't know, a bereavement, or, there are things that happen in life that make you look at things in a different way. And when you start to look at things in a different way, you get fresh ideas. So in my case, when I was doing the doctorate, I was challenged on my values and belief systems in a way that I've never been challenged before. Mm-hmm. And it was that, and once I'd sort of, my eyes had been opened with this rather difficult conversation with one of my tutors, I was then able to use critical reflection at a level I've never used before. Mm-hmm. So, we teach this on our programs. There are different skills that you can have to get people to think differently and not necessarily promote one particular philosophy or one particular idea, but actually teach people how to critically reflect. And, there are formal modules on some of the master's programs that we run that teach people just how to do that, critically around data or around emotion or around how you feel, and use that process to then come up with new ways of thinking. There's appreciative inquiry. There's Kolb's reflective cycle. I'm just citing a few of them. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, but when you're talking, one of the things that strikes me, though, is that, and I think this is one of the challenges in the sales world and B2B in particular, is this idea of, let's say, critical thinking, is that it's not really encouraged.
No.
Because it's like,
we don't
want to unloose the beast, because if we teach our fellows how to think critically about, in customer situations, they're not going to stop when they think about, this our beloved, vaunted sales process we put together that's not really working. They're going to be thinking critically about that as well.
Yeah, just trying to think how many job specs I've seen with the word critical reflection, as a key,
Zero?
Key competence. Yeah, zero. That's right. But
your values, and we'll go through your list of what you found through your research. So negative values, positive values, but let's just go with the positive values. They align with this idea. I was talking about that's what struck me when I was watching your videos and so on, with the horizontal and the vertical development, is these are all vertical development issues. These are not skills based.
No, they're not skills based.
This is you as a human based.
Yeah.
And
it's where it's got to start, doesn't it?
You're right. And how do we?
It's pretty deep. It's got to start pretty deep. And so is the question, how do you do that? How do you do that? And I think that there are, different ways you can do it. So, you can do it by getting feedback from customers about how they want to be sold to, and then getting feedback about how you're seen as a salesperson.
Yes.
You can do that by reviewing pivotal events in your sales career, where you've learnt or had a challenge, and you could use an examination of that using reflective practice to help you identify by the analysis of how you behaved. What does it tell you about your values and your belief systems and so on? So there are different ways that you can sort of explore it from a deep level. And we would argue that actually that's where you need to start in any sales development program. You need to start at that level, because unless you address the topic of sales performance from that deeper level, how sustainable will any skills development be that sits on top? So for us, it's the holy grail. It's the holy grail.
Let me run this by you then, just to get your thoughts on that, because I think I agree on what approach you're talking about. And you alluded to this earlier when you're talking about the layers of the onion.
Yeah.
I think one thing that's missing, and something, this is an area we're going to be doing more and more work on, is I think it would sellers, everybody, I don't know, stumbling over the words. Every salesperson has what I call a sales identity, meaning who they are as a seller. Now, to your point, they may not know how they're being received and perceived by the buyer, but I would, as a starting point, I would say they first need to know who they think they are as a salesperson. And that level of reflective, critical thought doesn't take place. And I think every seller, as a starting point, should be able to say, like in 5 words or 6 words, who they are as a seller, what their identity as a seller is.
Yeah.
And last point of that is just, and it's not sales culture. Yeah, I sort of had it with sales culture because I think that's the story that companies tell themselves about how they sell. Okay. And it has nothing to do with how they actually sell or how they're being perceived and received by the buyers.
Yeah.
And it's this idea of individual sellers' identity. You know, for me, I say, yeah, I'm a curious, creative, open-minded problem solver. You know, that's sort of been my approach throughout my career.
Yes.
Now, you know, I've had some feedback say, yeah, that's you're sort of aligned with who you are and so on. But yeah, I'm sort of conscious about the fact that that's what I am. That's my identity. That's the identity I want to have when I go out and talk to buyers. And it's almost like, hey, you know, take a challenge. Is, you know, write your identity as a seller on a, you know, Post-it note, stick it on your chest, and walk around when you go into client meetings with it. And how's that align? Yeah.
Yes, I think. I mean, you talk about 2 terribly important things. One is what identity do you want to be, and having the wherewithal to be able to define it. You know, I don't know how many people would be able to answer that question easily. They may give a sort of glib, you know, a quick off the cuff remark about it, and then you've got the other issue, which is, well, how do your customers perceive you, maybe against that particular framework? And it's really interesting. In some of the research that we've done, where we talk about the values, and we invite people to kind of rank themselves, if you like, against the values. Mm-hmm. And then we ask the customers, you know, to rank the salespeople. I would say that in 80% of the times, the difference is markedly different, dangerously different.
Yeah, I was going to say profoundly different. Right.
Actually, in some cases, you know, the customers rank salespeople more highly than the salespeople do against the values that we would consider the values to be in what we define as a winner's circle. In some cases, they're quite humble. You know, the way that they sort of, but it's quite rare that you would see that. In some cases, they're pretty much spot on, but the majority of the times, they're quite a long way, and that's dangerous. That is such a dangerous situation to be in.
Well, and that's why I think this idea of identity and having people start to be conscious about, understanding what their identity is, even if it just as a starting point is them putting on a piece of paper noting somewhere in physical form, this is who I think I am.
Yeah.
Even that as a starting point, you can then say, okay, well.
What's quite interesting is that when we start people on this journey of self, because the first, one of the first modules of any of the master's programs we run is based on this self-awareness thing that we're now talking about. And one of the very first things we do in the first morning is actually get them to draw a shield. Mm-hmm. And in the shield, we ask them to draw things that have happened in their life that have shaped them as a person. And they're not allowed to use words. It's just pictures. And they draw the shield, and normally it's got happy smiley faces around family, and it's got, a few other, they often very similar shields. And, graphs that go like this, looking at performing highly. You tend to see very similar kind of, and what we then do, and it normally happens later, is we challenge them with the depth of reflection that's gone into drawing that shield. So we get them to do a shield right at the very beginning, at the beginning of the journey. And then once they've gone through these layers of critical reflection, we say, well, come back and let's draw that shield again, now knowing what you now know. And by that time, they would have done Johari window exercises, they would have done some sort of self-analysis. But, the very first module of I know we're not here to really talk about master's programs, but this is just describing to you what we do, because it gets to it's about manage myself. It's about how you manage it. You can't really sort of move on unless you've got those bases covered. And it's quite often referred to as one of the most transformational modules in what we do. It's this degree of going out, being curious, like you were saying, and not afraid to ask questions about themselves so that they can then shape who their identity is, or if it's leadership, what sort of leader are they perceived as, and what sort of leader do they want to become? It's where everything starts. And then once you've got that bit sorted, you can then do amazing things, I think, in terms of development. So I think you can teach people how to critically reflect, and you can teach people, you can give them skills and frameworks to help them do that. There's some that completely change their identity as a consequence of it. Right. There's some that do a bit of change, and there's some that don't. But it's always surprising me when you give people the space to be able to reflect and the time to do it, and give them some simple frameworks. Salespeople are bright, they can figure things out. And of course, if it's linked ultimately to this, well, how does your identity match with how you need to lead your sales organization, or how do you need to sell to customers if it's key account managers? You sort of open up a very fertile growth mindset approach, if you like, to how they then can develop. And I truly believe you can transform performance, taking people through that kind of journey.
Well, I would agree. But I think the challenge, though, is the way we're generally set up. From an enablement and training standpoint, is 180 degrees away from that.
It is so far away, and it's a very long journey, I think, to get this. We talked about sales as a profession a few times. People can fall into sales so easily, and we've talked about this before. But actually, it is, like you said earlier, it's a really sophisticated, complex business. It's fun. It's got all of these great things going for it. You can make good money from it. You can earn a good career. But actually, there's a lot to it, and it needs to be taken seriously as a function. And I think from the sort of things that we're doing here is the education as opposed to training is a big part of the answer to that.
Yeah,
a big part. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that as you talk about the critical thinking, the difference between training and education, I was using when we were launching our e-learning platform a few years ago. It's currently on hiatus, but coming back. But yeah, our tagline was, you train pets, you educate people.
Oh, train. What I love about your approach is you're quite sort of controversial sometimes in some of your comments. Yeah. But I think you're absolutely right. People have an idea of, sheep dipping, or, there's a particular methodology and approach. And if you apply it, then you're going to be enormously successful. But we know that doesn't work. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, so we're going to talk about you had sort of 4 negative values, 4 positive values that sellers need to
Yes.
Bring to their interactions with buyers. And I just thought I'd start with the positive ones. You have authenticity,
client centricity,
proactive creativity, and tactful audacity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nowhere in there is it, give a better presentation, ask a better opening line, handle an objection, and so on.
No.
And it's these things, and I said I agree with these absolutely.
Yes.
Is how do that really becomes, I think, the challenge but also speaks to this idea that selling's very individualized and very.
It is, but it's a bit like the operating system, and then on top of that, you've got the applications that run on it. And if the operating system, runs to certain principles of operating, then every aspect of the sales process, whether it's prospecting or whether it's qualification or a negotiation with a customer, you can use the principles that underpinned by these words to actually drive questioning, listening, behavior. They simply are there all the time in the background, influencing everything that you do. And I think that's what's so interesting. You can layer on top of it any particular framework or technique, and not every single one, but many, and it works. But I think that, and I think that's the beauty about, the link between predictable behavior and values and belief systems, and that's why if you to the concept of cultural approach, if a customer is looking for a salesperson to act in a certain way or deal with them in a certain way, they're going to be looking for values and beliefs. They don't care about methodology or how you're selling. They want to know, can they trust you? Are you going to work with me?
Well,
Well,
I think you really nailed it, though, is you're talking about principles, or we can alternatively say philosophy or whatever, but I mean, we I think are suffering in the sales world from the sort of triumph of methods over principles.
Yeah.
And
so how do we overcome that, Andy? How's that overcome? How does that?
Well, that's really the heart of the question, right? I was just going to share this quote with you from my favorite quotes from I think a guy that operated in the 20th century. Harrington Emerson was a business writer.
Right.
And his quote was, quote, he said, "As to methods, there may be 1,000,000 and then some, but principles are few."
Oh, I love that.
The man who grasps principles can successfully select his own methods. The man who tries methods ignoring principles is sure to have trouble.
Oh, gosh.
Isn't that a great quote?
That is a fantastic quote. That is brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, and to me, that's
it. That's what we're talking about.
Problem right there.
Yeah, it is.
We're all about methods. We're all about skills, but if they're not undergirded by principles.
But Howard Gardner, who wrote 5 Minds of the Future, it was similar. He was defining, we don't teach people knowledge. He is referring quite often to education. We need to teach people certain principles, and I think it was, I think he was one of the people when I was doing my research into sales that had one of the biggest influences on my work. It was 5 simple principles that he defined, and he felt these should be taught at schools. Forget knowledge, just teach principles and let then the student use those to guide them in whatever area they want to investigate. And it made a big impact. Yeah.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think somebody on the show, I don't know, a couple of years ago, who basically, was challenging people listening, is saying, a sales writer saying, we should just stop sales training, right? There's always too much, right? We do too much sales training.
Yeah.
Really thinking in the context of this is look, I mean, it's only so far we can sort of push this wet noodle up the hill with our nose. That's, skills based.
And it's right. And it's, we sometimes get RFPs, where we're asked to quote on a particular project, which is a skills based program. And then we had one the other day. Yeah. And then you look at the RFP and they say, okay, we want questioning skills or listening or objection handling or whatever.
Right.
You can see whoever wrote the brief, sort of where their mindset is. And then they have in the criteria innovation as the thing that they value most. Yeah. So how do you respond to that? Yeah. Do you then challenge the brief and say, actually, you're asking the wrong bloody question?
You have
here.
to.
Yeah. So, or don't you see? So, and then if you give them something that they don't want to hear, then you risk losing it or whatever. But, this is sometimes the issue that we have is that if you're true to your own beliefs and value system, you will challenge a brief and you will question, are you asking the right question? But it's difficult because they've gone through months of coming together to form the RFP to have someone say, sorry, you got it wrong. You're fighting against a machine that has been entrenched, and it's quite difficult.
It is, and that is the challenge. And I think that entrenchment starts at the very top of organizations.
It does, yeah.
That think that, by and large, sales is sort of this necessary evil, and we need to do a certain amount to try to train them.
Box. Yeah,
but beyond that, we're not going to be really terribly innovative. And not, this whole idea of, how do we educate people about these principles is one, and how do we inculcate them into individuals? Because, start with authenticity you had, or even the 4 that I have in my book, which overlap this to some degree.
They do. There's a very close correlation.
Yeah, how do you, if you're asking a CEO, we're going to do we need a little budget because we're going to do some authenticity training. Bullshit. We're not going to do that. Teach them to do better presentations. So it's like, that's not really the trade-off. Right?
Yeah, that's right.
Actually, their presentations will become better if they're able to present them from a position of authenticity. I mean, it's this human element that continues to be the missing piece.
Yeah.
And that we presume people have. And on one hand, we know that people buy from people. Yeah. Yet the way we enable and train is from the position of no. People buy from process, people buy product, people buy features. And it's like,
There is another layer, I think, that we haven't talked about and may not have time, but it's actually when you talk about sort of systems of ways of working, you've got this relentless pursuit of quarterly results. And, I think that's another dimension that influences hugely, individual behaviors. So sometimes when we're talking to people, they say, well, I know I need to do this. I know I need to have more patience with how I work with customers to close a deal. But I've been asked to bring this $20 million deal from Q4 into Q3. So that's what I'm doing. There's a lot of pressure on me to do that. So it's not just sales. Well, I know that we haven't talked about that. It's not just, sort of individual sales capability. It's the whole system of selling that needs to be looked at in order to, I think, drive the right kind of behaviors out there with customers, the customers that customers want to see.
And I think you identified one of the real challenges right there, which is, and I've had the same feedback to my book, where on multiple occasions from sales leaders saying, I love this book, but, and I'm like, oh, so what you're saying to me is, in order to hit your number, you have to be super salesy. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
And, it's like, well, it's like, that's really a false trade-off.
Yeah.
Right? I understand there's always an element in change when you're trying to make change, is this aspect of, we're trying to fix the wings on an airplane in flight. But that's the challenge of change. And there's such inertia now to change in sales. And despite what everybody wants to say is, we've got all this change in selling. It's like, no, the accoutrements have changed, right? The technologies, the mediums we use. But
yes, and it's also about having enough opportunities in the pipeline to not have to be pressurized, to do things that the buyers may not want to see. And I think that's a part of the issue could be it's not that you need to teach closer, be more salesy. The fundamental problem is that you simply haven't got your pipeline flow right. You haven't got the opportunities that will allow you the space, and allow the sales the team the space to do things correctly and in a way that customers want. So I think it's a complex challenge.
It is, yes.
Yeah. Which can be addressed at different levels, but it's where you have limited opportunities to hit numbers. That's when the pressure really gets mounted on, and you end up with some pretty appalling sales behavior driven by senior leadership. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but I think even in instances where companies may be hitting their numbers, but certainly in sort of the SaaS world in particular, but subscription world, is, there's raging ineffectiveness of selling that takes place, low win rates occurring across the board. But they've sort of become wedded to this model, which is we know how to harvest a lot of opportunity at the top of the funnel.
Yeah.
We don't have to be that good because we'll close a certain low percentage of them, but that'll be enough.
Right. Yeah.
And that is a horribly damaging mindset as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's, arguably it's going to be difficult for many of those companies, with any sort of economic slowdown. They don't really know how to sell, right? And sell effectively. And I would make the argument that for, if you're a company and there was a study that came out in a book, earlier this year that, average win rate across the world on deals 100K and higher is 17%, which, is not good.
It's not good.
And that's something that really has to be addressed. And that I think is, and I think if your win rate is at that point, I would make the argument that you've got too many opportunities in your pipeline.
Yeah.
And we have this issue of right-sizing what pipelines really should be and normalizing what win rates should be, because those are out of whack completely right now.
Interesting to get any pointers in terms of the research that you're looking at. I'd be very interested to look at that in more detail. Yeah, so I'm sure you'll be sharing that. So thank you.
Phil, always a pleasure.
It's always a pleasure talking to you, Andy.
Yeah. So if people want to learn more about Consalia and you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, the best way would be to probably go to the website, www.consalia.com. I mean, we're pretty easy to find. Just get in contact with myself. I'd be very pleased to speak to anyone who's interested.
All right.
In the conversation that we've had.
Perfect. Well, we'll have another one.
Oh, right.
That was fun. Always good.
Oh, great. Yes. Next time I think we should talk about predictive analytics.
Oh, okay. take me outside my comfort zone.
If you'd like to, I think it's just a very interesting. Yeah, how can you predict the future in a world that's becoming less certain? And I think it's an interesting topic.
It is.
I don't know the answers, but I think it's a conversation that we need to have at some point.
Yeah, I always calls to mind the famous quote from Niels Bohr, the Danish physicist who was part of the Manhattan Project, who said, paraphrasing, but he said, predictions are very difficult, especially about the future.
Yes.
Yes,
and just one other thing to add, if we can, is we've talked a lot about mindsets. We have this mindset survey that's freely available on the.
Tell people about that.
Yes, on the website. If you're interested in exploring any aspect of values and belief systems, then click. You can see it on the Consalia website page. Click on the mindset. It's free to use. You can even get perspectives through that channel on customer perspectives as well. So I invite people to take part in the mindset survey.
Cool. All right. Excellent. Glad you brought that up. I encourage people to do that. And Phil, until next time.
Until next time. Thanks, Andy. Yeah. Thank you very much. That was great.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I'm so grateful for your support of the show. And I want to thank our guest, Phil Squire, for sharing his insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. So thank you for your help with that. And as always, thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.